Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Lower East Side here in the city of Detroit, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation, now a content partner to the new bridgedetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Givens Davidson.
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the east side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you listen to us on. We drop a new episode every week, so make sure you turn on those notifications. Today, we are delighted to welcome Anthony Adams to the show. Adams is the former Detroit Deputy Mayor under Kwame Kilpatrick, former Detroit School Board President, and is principal at Marine Adams Law. We're talking to him about proposal in development in Detroit and a possible mayoral bid. Anthony, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Thank you for having me, Orlando and Donna. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you.
We are excited to have you. We are so excited to have you. So of course, we have all of the questions, but we're going to save that until later. But until then, how was everyone's holiday weekend? A long weekend we had, huh? Happy Labor Day.
Thank you. Happy Labor Day. Mine was great. It was really, really great. We had family over on Saturday and on Sunday, and on Monday we went over to my daughter's house and she cooks. So I love spending time with my family, and we had a great time. And it was really cool because Kevin's daughters came over and my daughters were here, and they really like each other. So it was a family bonding moment for us.
Don't you love it when that happens?
Yes.
I love it. Mine was pretty laid back. Had a chance to get out and ride my bike around the Lower East Side. Had a chance to get a little golf in and just kind of sat on the back patio.
You're a golfer? Where do you do golf, Anthony?
I call myself a golfer. My friends would say I probably don't golf that well.
You golf at Chandler Park?
I get up to Chandler Park occasionally. I go over to the Detroit Golf Club occasionally. Wherever there's a venue and wherever there's golf, I love Rouge. I have played a lot at Rouge Golf Course. It's probably one of my favorite courses.
Wow.
What do you like about it?
Rouge is a very challenging course because you have to hit all the shots. It's not a course that's straight. There's some shots you hit to a spot. There's some shots you have to hit uphill, blind holes. It's just a very challenging course. Probably one of the more challenging public courses you could play.
Okay.
Wow.
What did you do your birthday weekend, Orlando?
Hey, party over here. Hey, I did. What did I do? I spent time with family. Yeah, I was with the family. We did a little bit of barbecue grilling and stuff, just a little bit of that.
Are you a griller, or you come and eat what's been grilled?
I can do both, but this particular instance, I came to eat what was grilled, Mr. Adams. Thank you for the clarifying question. Okay. But I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I could do a little bit of everything.
All right.
But this weekend I was not cooking. It was my birthday weekend, so got to hang out with some family and of course run some errands and enjoy the Jazz Fest. And so the Jazz Fest broadcasted all weekend long on WDET 1019, and you could watch the live stream on Facebook and on PBS. And so, being void of being able to go to any live musical events and be around crowds, to be able to sit and hear some live music from the Jazz Fest that I'm normally front row center at, it was pretty dope. Did you listen at all?
I did. There was a young man, Conway. Henry Conway's son performed, and so I had a chance to watch his performance. I really enjoyed it. I didn't quite watch as much as I normally do because I, like you, I love going down there and just hanging out. I don't necessarily like to sit in the front. I kind of like to sit in the back and just hang with the people, with the real Detroiters, man. It's just such a fun, man.
The Jazz Fest is just not something you can recreate on TV, though.
Right.
No,
You got to
no,
be
no, no.
outside. You got to be there. You got to be around all the people and see the sights. And so I watched some of it. I have to be honest though, when you have grandchildren over, your TV does not belong to you anymore. So, the last thing they wanted me to do was put on jazz. We were watching cartoons and whatever. So, um, so we watched a little bit of it, but it's an experience. There's some things we can do really, really well online. The Jazz Fest just is not one of them for me.
I know.
I kinda, I tend to agree with that. But just really being able to hear like improvisational live music, and we haven't been able to hear that in a long time.
True.
I thought that was really cool. I enjoy Robert Glasper. I am a huge Robert Glasper fan.
Right.
Sounds of Black Radio Volumes 1 and 2 are some of my favorite compilations of music, and so to have him here in the D, that was a treat. That was a treat for me. So I fanned out just a tad.
One thing I've done is, I actually went out and bought me an old turntable, and I have my speakers and I have my amplifier. So now I'm really starting to play just the wax, which is a completely different sound than what you hear digitally. It's just something that I really remember. And actually, one of the first albums that I pulled out was the NWA, if you can believe that,
On wax,
on wax.
straight face.
No,
It's so
You know,
funny.
go on.
Go ahead, Donna.
No,
I was just saying I have a record player too, and I was just playing over the weekend the Miseducation of Lauren Hill on vinyl. Oh my God, that sound on vinyl? Whew.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I love my sound bar on my TV. Listen, you get every sound on there. And I was playing music and it kept skipping a little bit. So it actually sounded like I was listening to vinyl. It was like, I don't know if I'm recreating that effect, but you know me in technology. There's something about being able to listen to stuff and not have to go through all of the rituals of having vinyl that really appeals to me. So I can't say I'm nostalgic for, although I do have a record player. My daughter bought me a record player for Christmas a couple of years ago.
oh, that's great.
So I have a couple of albums.
Well, we had a chance to really see the evolution of music, because when I first started driving, we had the old 8-track machines that sat. Oh, Lana wouldn't know about this.
I know about the 8-track.
It sat underneath your dashboard, and you always pulled it out because you didn't want to necessarily leave it in because it might disappear.
We had an 8-track when I was young, and we went to Idlewild, and we had 3 8-tracks. We had Sounds of the Key of Life, Steely Dan.
Ooh, I had that on vinyl. Oh.
And George Benson, This Masquerade.
I have that on vinyl too.
I tell you, listening to This Masquerade, driving around, it was just like the ultimate everything. It was by far my favorite. George Benson is just amazing to me. But yeah, 8-tracks were something,
When we first
tried to do it.
George Benson could actually sing.
Right.
Because I think up until that album, he had never really sang a track. And so when he came out with This Masquerade, that was just a phenomenal song and brings back so many warm memories of my youth.
Man,
man. The instrumentals on there, I'm telling you, Breezy is just so wonderful. So anyway, so I'm glad you guys had a wonderful holiday weekend. To me, it's the best holiday weekend I've had since we've been indoors. Well, I guess there's only been like Memorial Day, but the best weekend I've had.
4th of July. We had a lot of
well, that's true. Memorial Day, 4th of July. Of course, my wedding day was great, but
congratulations.
Holiday, thank you. So this was a holiday where we just really connected, and I just felt, it was good.
I'm happy to hear it. All right, guys, it's time for fresh off the press news that we were thinking about. If you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Donna, fresh off the press.
Public conversations on justice should include the incarcerated. That's Isaac Winfield in an op-ed on bridgedetroit.com. So That was absolutely a phenomenal read, because, I was thinking about this, and what he talks about is we're talking about policing, reforming policing, but we're not talking about reforming prisons. And we really need to be. And a couple of things spring to mind. He talks about how much the US is actually spending on prisons, and it's a ridiculous amount. And there are, what did he say? I want to get these facts right here. 36,000 people in prison at an annual cost of almost $2 billion. And you have to ask yourself, what if we spent $2 billion preventing their descent into prison? Going to prison is not a sign of community success. It is an evidence of our failure. And the other thing to me that stands out is the way that we dehumanize people who are in prison. They no longer seem to have human rights. They don't seem to matter to the rest of the world. We don't ask them about their experiences, and we don't ever seem to want to improve their experiences. Nobody's running for office anywhere in this nation saying we are going to reform prisons. That people might even be talking about reforming policing, but reform prisons. There are some people who cannot. There's nothing that you could do that's too bad to prisoners. And all of this hits home because I'm also reading the book Blood in the Water by U of M's own Heather Thompson. I think she grew up in Detroit or near Detroit. I know her sister Saskia is over the Land Bank Authority. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and it's really, 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 really long in detail, where she outlines the Attica uprising in 1971. And in reading this book, just the sheer barbarity and inhumanity towards prisoners before them they got there, during and after the uprising. And I haven't gotten to the fallout after the fact. I still have like 14 more hours to go. I'm listening to it. I say I'm reading, but I'm really listening. But it's really stunning. And so when you read this, here we are 39 years after this Attica uprising, and we're revisiting the exact same issues. It makes it clear to me that we cannot have a real racial justice conversation without looking at incarcerated people. We just can't, because, and I've stopped, we call people prisoners, but in the same way I don't call people slaves, I call them enslaved people. I say incarcerated people because you have to maintain that humanity even in your dialogue in order to maintain any kind of sense of justice. So it was a very moving article. I loved what he's doing. I agree with him that we need to talk to people who've been to prison, who are in prison right now, to really understand the reforms that are needed. And we have a good friend.
The full impact of what's happening currently. He makes that case around meaningful reform happening only when we consider the voices of folks who are living the prison experience.
That's right.
And it's interesting to sort of raise the juxtaposition of the police reform as well as criminal justice reform, and how they both are so intertwined, because our rates of incarceration, and what I love about you, Don, is that you're such an avid reader and you always are sharing your intellectual information with people. Rates of incarceration increased right around the 80s and 90s, and we've maintained such a high level. And when you actually take a look at the criminal justice budget here in Wayne County, you will see that we spend probably 40% of the Wayne County budget is dedicated towards criminal justice issues. And you have another 50% of the city's budget is based on public safety concerns and issues. And so we're spending just a tremendous amount of money to police as well as incarcerate. And you do wonder whether or not, if we were to redirect those dollars, it will put us, I think, in a much better position to create better outcomes. The state of Michigan recognized that even when they began to reduce their prison population, because they were spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year to have people incarcerated. We spend more money to incarcerate a person in Michigan than we do in a per people allocation to education funding. So it really tells you that our perspective is a bit skewed. We rather spend money to incarcerate than rather money to educate.
And you just roll out that data just runs out off your tongue. Can you remind us what proportion of incarcerated people are African American in the state of Michigan?
I think that the rate of I think this African Americans in Michigan, I think, make up about 14% of the actual state population, but I think we make about 35 to 40% of those that are incarcerated.
Yeah,
Our
a
rate
little
of
more than
incarceration is much higher
It's more than that. Yeah.
percent of the population. And when you look at that and you look at where these people are coming from, it tells you a lot about how we spend our money and how we spend and dedicate our resources. And if we're going to be in position to impact dramatic change, then we have to change the conversation about what we do. Because we continue to do the same thing in the same box, in the same manner over the years, and we keep getting the same result. We're not going to break that cycle unless we put ourselves in a position to create new modes of thinking about what it is we really want to do and what we want to accomplish.
and other systems that we typically won't even conflate with the judicial system or the Michigan Department of Corrections, like the census. Prison populations are mostly in rural populations, and the prisoner population, you know, comes from, you know, urban cores like the city of Detroit. Those inmates are counted toward the communities that they are serving in, not the communities that they come from. So even though there's a disproportionate rate of us in prison and being, and we were talking about it right before the pandemic happened, being at risk for health code violations by deteriorating buildings, not being able to social distance in the time of coronavirus, and not really even having adequate access to equitable and high functioning healthcare. Those communities benefit from having folks from urban cores in prisons in their community. And so I think when we talk about criminal justice reform, we also need to look at tenets of different systems that are inadvertently or directly connected to it. And the census and the allocation of resources is one of them that is glaring to me as we approach the deadline for the census this month.
And go on.
I'm sorry, there actually is another component part of that, which is sort of mental health issues and the criminalization of poverty in America. You know, they would say that at any point in time, probably 25 to 30% of the population that was housed in the Wayne County Jail were people who actually had mental health issues and mental health challenges. And then when you put on top of that the cash bail system, which kept people incarcerated for minor crimes, which thankfully the courts have gone and begun to change those whole patterns. You know, we criminalize being poor because if you can't pay your parking tickets, then you end up driving without insurance, where you end up with multiple tickets, where you end up incarcerated. And so those are byproducts of poverty versus a criminal act or criminal activity. Simply
But it's also a byproduct of Blackness.
Yes.
Because if you're Black, you're more likely to be stopped and observed and searched.
Yes.
You're more likely to be charged. You're more likely to be convicted. You're more likely to be sentenced for a longer term. At every step in the criminal justice process, Black people are overrepresented. And in Michigan, Black people are the only people who are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And that's the reason why I don't like trying to conflate all people of color as being one. There are many things that are harming our Latino brothers and sisters and our Native brothers and sisters, but they are in prison at a proportional rate to their existence in this state. Right. Black people constitute 14% of residents in the state and 49% of prisoners. Right. White people constitute 77% and 46% of prisoners. So when you look at the disproportionality, and somebody can do that, and then there's another chart that I saw that shows the rate by race and ethnicity, and you can see that 2,161 Black people, that's the rate compared to, well, they look at it, 374 white, 588 Hispanic, 2,169 Black, and 924 American Indian and Native. So when we look at this, and this is including federal and state prisons, local jails, halfway houses, and whatever. When we look at the overrepresentation, we've got to demand that we stop pretending like the law is colorblind. Our prisons are colorblind, and we understand that you're criminalizing Blackness, you're criminalizing poverty and Blackness, you're criminalizing mental health problems, you're criminalizing minor offenses, and you're criminalizing children. You're criminalizing 5-year-olds who are getting snatched out of kindergarten. I even think I saw a preschooler where a police officer, I'm taking you to preschool, because the belief is that we have to, it's no different than slavery. The way that we think that we have to treat children and Black people is so damaging. And so, you know, we should be talking to them. I think if we talk to prisoners, and I have and I do, at times you find out they're human beings. Some of them made mistakes. Some of them did things
that are innocent.
Some of them are absolutely innocent, and some of them have committed heinous crimes. But the majority have not committed heinous crimes. The majority are somewhere in the spectrum of, normal population behavior, but they are imprisoned, and we need to look at that humanity.
Well, that's, it's interesting you mentioned about children, because I've had the distinct honor, I would say, of representing at least 2 young African-American men in suburban school districts where there was a serious attempt to criminalize what I would call childish behavior. And it became, I think, an epic battle in trying to convince the authorities, if you will, that this was not behavior that needed to be criminalized, but it needed to have some assistance. And so I was in position to direct some young men to some mentoring programs so that they had the opportunity to divert themselves out of the criminal justice system. The irony in the city of Detroit is that every aspect of the criminal justice system we actually control. And so it's kind of ironic that our conduct and our behavior and how we treat our population mirrors what others outside of our city would do. They just recently had a study where they indicated that in Macomb County, Black and whites charged with the same crime, Black people would charge far more seriously than whites. And so it's a real issue. The scales of justice are not balanced, and she's kind of peeking up underneath her blindfold to see who's being administered justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work left to be done, but I am glad we are raising this issue and that we're providing some context. Shout out to Isaac Winfield for the op-ed in Bridge, Detroit. Donna, I'm going to switch up my fresh off the press just a little bit. Maybe we can get 2 in, but I was right before I got on for Authentically Detroit, received a little bit of breaking news in the form of a press release where we have a letter calling for independent investigation of the Detroit Police Department that is signed by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, State Senator Stephanie Chang, City Councilwoman Raquel Castaneda Lopez, and City Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield. And they specifically cite instances where they believe that Detroit police use excessive force at the Detroit Will Breathe protests. And so they have sent a letter to Mayor Mike Duggan, Police Chief James Craig, the Board of Police Commissioners, and they carbon copied the Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. So they cite specific instances and dates where they believe police used excessive force, and they're calling out racialized injustice. They are calling out excessive use against journalists who had been covering the events. We know of some journalists that have gotten injured trying to just do their job and record for public record, as well as activists that Donna, you and I have had on this show and talked to and have worked with in community. And so again, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, State Senator Stephanie Chang, and Council members Lopez and Mary Sheffield have sent an official letter with their signatures to the mayor, the Board of Police Commissioners, and the Chief of Police calling for an independent investigation. Your thoughts?
I am so disgusted with the mayor and the police chief for how they are responding to the civil rights of protesters to stand on their beliefs. It makes me ill. I was really excited that the federal judge came down with a ruling that there was a 14-day moratorium on them doing anything. Police Chief Craig's response was nothing short of repulsive. He said, I'm not doing anything wrong. And his mindset, his attitude towards citizens, is the opposite of what we need in a rule of law. All of this, as you know, has been very emotional to me from the beginning. When I hear people say, well, these aren't Detroiters, they need to go home. That's what they told Martin Luther King when he was in Birmingham, Alabama, okay? We have been telling people who protest for civil rights, go home. It's a local matter. It's not a local matter when it's a civil rights matter. I have family members who traveled to Baltimore when they were in Baltimore protesting Freddie Gray. I know people who traveled to Ferguson, but when it's coming to Detroit, people are really cool with justice for people elsewhere. But in our own communities, what bothers me more than anything, because I expect that from white people, but when I see Black people justifying the suppression of free speech against anti-racist marchers, it literally makes me ill. My nephew lives in Pittsford, New York, or Rochester, New York. I don't know exactly what city he lives near Rochester, and he has been out there on the front lines documenting. He's actually doing a documentary on the police abuses there. And this is the city where they had the mentally ill man naked in a street with some type of hood on his head, and he died. And now it's ruled a homicide. This is the same city, right? So my nephew is out there. He was out there, I want to say last Friday, but I don't know the exact date. And he was shot in his neck while holding a movie camera 12 times by rubber bullets.
Yeah.
Where you can see him bleeding, and he could barely walk the next day. That's assault. It is legalized assault. Now I'm happy to announce that all the brass has stepped down because they know charges are coming. They know some bad stuff is about to come their way, but I am outraged. And so if it's not okay for you to shoot my nephew 12 times with a rubber bullet, it is not okay for you to shoot somebody else's nephew, son, daughter, cousin, aunt, uncle. It's just wrong. And I'm so disgusted that our city is not modeling justice. We're behind the 8 ball.
It's really very, very difficult to understand the response, because when you're talking about a city of Detroit, there was such, I think, a spin put on the whole demonstration movement to trying to make this seem like the outsiders were coming in to deal with issues that we in Detroit, you had the Coalition Against Police Brutality, which have been advocating these issues for years. And then you get We Can't Breathe, which seems to be supported by, I think, Wayne State professors are heavily involved in that whole movement. But the reality is that police will always reject calls for reform, whether it's in Ferguson, whether it's in Rochester, whether it's in New York. They will reject calls for reform because there is a fear in the city that people are really afraid of crime, and they're afraid of the police not coming. That's a real fear that some people have. And so I was surprised.
I'm sorry, but didn't I grow up in Detroit where police were coming when you called them anyway? I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Police response time. What's the police response time, by the way?
Depends on how you acted, because what they have done in, I would say, manipulating the data on response time, they include things that are not necessarily response items.
Or they send the fire department or an EMS to limit the gap in response.
Yeah, between when I call versus when I respond. And then if I group all my calls together, I'm able to get a much better picture of my response time. But that's a manipulation of CompStat data, which I think requires some investigation. I'm curious to see politically how that's going to be handled, given the fact Dana Nessel is somewhat independent, but she would obviously have to use the resources of the state police, which is not necessarily a sympathetic organization to investigating criminal activity. Perhaps there should be a call for some type of independent commission to look at that. It clearly can't be the police board of commissioners, which that's what they were set up to do, because they have become, in many people's perspective, a shield for the Detroit Police Department instead of being objective oversight, they have not done so. And it's really a failure, I think, of our own internal system to police and control and monitor our behavior.
Agree. Could not agree more. Feel very strongly about that. So thank you for bringing that article, Orlando.
Yeah,
That
it's really fresh off the press.
and there's actually a divide in Detroit politics right now, right?
Absolutely.
You had those who supported Rashida Tlaib and those who supported Brenda Jones, and one side won. At least
resoundingly, quite frankly.
right, one side won. And so to me, the other thing that we have to also recognize is that the political establishment in Detroit has become detached from the lived experiences and beliefs and behaviors of average Detroiters. They're not tapped in.
But we're not ready to have that conversation, because what we have created is a political elite caste system that absolutely has no bridge to the people who are mostly impacted by the so-called policies and reforms that you and your political elite brothers and sisters are putting in place. But we'll have that conversation another day.
But I would say this, right before the pandemic, remember what was happening. They were attacking city council 500 deep every time they had a conversation. When they talked about overtaxation on property taxes, there were people who were meeting on weekends and during the day, 500, 300, 200. The reality is that elites will never be able to overpower the common people when common people show up. And right now, I believe we're going to show up in November this year, and hopefully next year. But let's change the subject so we can talk about what's going on this year.
One little point I'd like to jump in, because when we talk about those demonstrations, what was ironic was the level of police presence that were at these community meetings, with the police bus parked right in front of the city county building, and then the halls of the auditorium ringed with police. I haven't seen that many police in the neighborhoods, quite frankly.
Oh, exactly. That's a very good point. Arresting people for being out of order, and city council people calling police. Come on now. Okay. So earlier today,
fresh off the press segment, if you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Now on to our featured discussion with Anthony Adams. Anthony, we have a litany of questions we want to ask you about. Donna, you take it away.
All right. Anthony, earlier today, you shared with me your perspective on Proposal N. Do you support this bond proposal? If not, why not?
Absolutely not. I mean, supporting Proposal N is not the way to go. From a matter of perspective of policy, the best housing preservation and blight preservation strategy is to keep people in their homes. If you look at the numbers, and you know I'm a numbers guy, we spent about $532 million demolishing property here in the city of Detroit. If you take that back to 2010, we probably spent close to $800 million. At this clip, we will have spent $1 billion in demolishing property here in the city of Detroit. And the irony of it is that a lot of those funds were directed and designed to keep people in their houses, to provide mortgage relief, to allow for transition on housing into better situations, and we completely failed in that regard. But even if you look at the program of what has actually occurred in our demolition program, when you take a look at the level of investigations that were underway, whether it's by the FBI, whether it's by the HUD Inspector General, whether it's by the Detroit Auditor General, whether it's by the Detroit Inspector General, there have been numerous instances where hundreds of millions of dollars has been spent. And quite frankly, there's been a total lack of transparency in the whole process, because part of the failure is that there really isn't an overarching strategy on how to address the housing issue here in the city of Detroit. We have multiple development entities that are supposed to be helping us redevelop our city. And when you take a look at the DDA, the DEGC, the Land Bank, the Housing Revitalization and Development Department, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, we have too much administration involved in handling these processes, because they don't have a policy construct on how to move forward and redevelop housing in the city of Detroit. So there are a number of things we could talk about why we shouldn't vote for it, but I always like to pivot and talk about the future of really what that structure should look like, and I'm sure you'll give me that opportunity.
Well, I'm actually really interested, because if you're not for proposal N, what are you for?
What I'm for is redesigning the overall economic development system here in the city of Detroit. I think part of the problem, as I laid out earlier, is that we have multiple entities that are designed to promote economic development. When you look at the administrative burden of all of those entities, and then we can take the proposal in as an example. If we spent $532 million in demolition, only $332 million of that was spent in actual physical demolition. The other $200 million was spent in administrative overhead and costs and the paying of consultants. That is not an effective use of money. And when you put on top of that the fact that you have a large bureaucracy, I estimate that we probably have about 500 people in the administrative bureaucracy that's designed to promote economic development. I believe we need to throw that.
In the quasi, does your numbers include the quasi-governmental agencies?
Quasi-governmental agencies.
And the DEGC? Okay.
Exactly.
So, I wanna just interject something real quickly, you know, because coming from a nonprofit, we have to demonstrate our administrative rate. And anything over 20% is considered inefficient. So if you're talking $500 million, you're talking about $100 million on administration or indirect costs. You're saying that it's really double that.
Double that. And that's a frightening number, especially when you consider what needed to be done with those dollars. You know, as we discussed earlier, I mean, part of the issue was the fact that how the program was designed in the state of Michigan. And I went back and took a look at that. There was a major focus and emphasis on the actual demolition of housing. We had a blight issue, that's true, but we also had a housing issue where we had people that were being forced out of their houses because they were being overtaxed and could not afford to pay their bills. We also had a water crisis issue where people obviously were suffering from water shortages. And you know, then we had the tax foreclosure issue, which forced a number of people out of their houses. And then we actually have an affordability issue in the city of Detroit. People in the city of Detroit spend an average of 40% of their income towards housing. And when you tie that in with the perpetual payment plan with DTE, a perpetual payment plan with the water department, a perpetual payment plan with the taxing authorities, there really is very little income that people have to do the things necessary in order to support themselves. So my position is that we have to throw that system out. We have to put the dollars in the hands of the organizations that actually do the work. The administration downtown should be, I would say, very thin. They should be in managing the process and empowering community organizations to actually do the work to do the job. That allows them to have share metrics on how we evaluate their performance. If they're not performing, we identify other organizations who can do the work. We require nonprofits to partner with smaller entities so that we can have capacity building. We continue to go for the home run with the Chrysler projects and the big deals. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the people who really need the money aren't getting anything. There is no reason why we don't have a robust housing rehabilitation fund. With all due respect, Proposal N doesn't put $1 in the pocket of anybody who has a bad roof on their house who wants that roof fixed. And so when you talk about where our priorities are, clearly Proposal N is not the way to go. We should not be adding more debt to the books of the city. We should be adding more opportunity for people to do the things that they need in order to survive. We need to focus on people and not projects.
All right, let me interject just for a second, because you touched on a few different systems, some of which the municipal government can control, but some of these systems have been set up by the legislative body in Lansing. And so as an operative or even a potential candidate for mayor, this is a question that political candidates that are not running for a seat in Lansing don't get asked often. But what is your legislative policy agenda for Lansing? What sorts of things would you like to see reformed and that you would fight for in Lansing?
The legislative policy agenda is one that most of our conservative legislators would agree. It's called self-empowerment. Give us the tools that we need in order to survive. Why can we not take a look at the taxing structure to see exactly how much tax revenue is really being generated in the city of Detroit? When you start to take a look at all the special purpose tax districts that go in and all of the tax revenue that's diverted from the city of Detroit, I would ask the legislature to allow us to redirect some of those resources, especially where the debt requirements of those special tax districts are not met, to allow us to recapture that money. We spend a lot of money is diverted out of the city system because of special purpose tax districts. They really have nothing to do with the state of Lansing, other than that's why they set the laws up. And so we want to begin to restructure the relationship from a tax perspective on how we do things differently. I think another area is in the area of social service programming. If you look at the city of Detroit, 60% of the people in this town receive some type of transfer payment, whether it's from a retirement account, whether it's from the state of Michigan, they're getting a transfer of income. So we know and identify who our people are in our neighborhood. What we have to begin to do is get the silo out of the Michigan Department of Social Services, because they operate in a manner that does not give a broad perspective of how to manage and how to enhance the population. And what I would argue is that we need to take a look at how those systems operate. We can change them administratively. They can change them administratively and statutorily to provide for more direct service and funding to people in our neighborhood. If we take a look at that entire picture, I think we will see we'll have a much different approach to how we go about doing things. The idea is not to necessarily have people so heavily dependent upon these services, but provide them with the tools necessary to enhance themselves. I think a third area is in the area of education. We all know that education funding is completely dilapidated in the state of Michigan, and particularly in the city of Detroit. And so what I'm asking for the changes in state law and legislation that will allow us to capture again more revenue for our students, more special purpose tax dollars. And it's not that we're asking for more money. We're simply saying, let's reallocate the money that we have in our system so that we can be more responsible for providing the direct services that we need to do.
You know what? You're not that far off from the Citizens Research Council of Michigan saying that we really need to evaluate this. The thing that I think is interesting is that we always look at the problems that we have from the perspective of Detroit, but we don't always look at the fact that downtown development authorities are killing cities and counties all over the state of Michigan because that tax capture is in perpetuity. It's supposed to incentivize development, but instead what ends up happening is it becomes a permanent fixture and it just broadens the divide. So do you see yourself as being able to form the kind of relationships with these other places that you can influence the legislation? The thing that comes to mind is that we have not had a mayor, in my opinion, and for what I've seen, really be effective at the state level since Kwame Young.
Right.
So do you still see yourself being able to do that?
Yeah, because it's all about building bridges and spending time. I mean, the remarkable thing about a person like Kwame Young is because he spent so much time in the legislature, and this was pre-term limit, the legislatures actually had relationships. And so if I was from the UP, I kind of understood what your problems were in Detroit and vice versa. And I always maintained that the greatest political feat ever occurred in the state of Michigan was Kwame Young's ability to impose a region-wide hotel, motel, liquor tax to finance the expansion of Cobo Hall. That was genius, and it probably will never be done again. But I think we have common interests in things that are important to smaller cities and smaller counties. We talk about the tax increment finances, the DDAs, and how they're draining revenue. I'm sure there are a lot of other communities out there that would like to see these types of changes occur. And I think we have to lead by example and show them how it can be done differently. I think we also have to take a strong look, and we have to develop those relationships. And so it's a relationship building process. We have to spend time in Lansing, but we're not going with cup in hand. We're going from a sense of power and empowerment to say, these are the things that we need to do for ourselves. we would prefer not to come to Lansing, to be quite honest with you. And if you give us these tools and the pack and the toolkit necessary to do the types of things we need to do, I think that's a message that, quite frankly, that resonates with them.
I don't know. I don't know, because a lot of people are getting rich in Detroit right now, and a lot of them are donating to other people's campaigns. You know, I mean, a lot of the laws that we seem to have are seem tailor-made for Dan Gilbert, and Dan Gilbert is able to go to Lansing and get whatever he wants. I think that we have to be honest about the fact that that the whole nation is functioning like a plutocracy right now. It's not just Detroit. This is, you know, what we do. And as long as, Orlando, you are muted. It's
I was just agreeing. I was saying legit, and I was just having this conversation in my brain in reference to the Forbes 400 list that dropped today. You know, highlighting the top 1% in this country. Yeah.
Well,
I was just agreeing.
you counteract that thinking by getting to people who are opposed to that. Their representatives can only represent them by consent. And I think people need to be exposed to the full, you know, all of the ideas out there. One of the reasons we do Authentically Detroit is we want to expose people to different ideas with the thinking that when people know more, they can demand more, and you have a better government, because democracy does not function when people are passive and uninformed, and when they are not, their needs are not being represented by elected officials. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what the city has.
There's a coziness, though, that exists within the city of Detroit. I agree with you, between the powers to be and the powers that are supposed to be protecting the interests. They're too cozy, and those relationships, quite frankly, need to be examined, and they need to be exposed, and people need to be held accountable. I think part of the difficulty is that you don't have a strong voice on the 11th floor who's prepared to hold people accountable, whether it's the NAACP, whether it's the Urban League, whether it's Black Family Development. There are a number of organizations out there that are supposed to be doing things, and yet no one is really asking the question, are you really doing what you're supposed to do? What is the influence of the philanthropic community? Who's getting these dollars? I mean, it was very interesting when they revealed the list of who the GTE Foundation was funding. And we saw a lot of people who we know and love on that list. And I was kind of surprised at exactly how much they were being paid.
Well, the DTE Foundation is funding ECN too. But I'm like Shirley Chisholm, unbossed, they'll fund me until they decide it's not a good idea anymore. I will take money to do the work that I need to do.
Because the wealth of the wicked.
Where's your money coming from? I do not apologize, but you will know I don't change my voice, and I only speak from the perspective. I really do try to make sure that my voice is for the people, understanding that at any given time you might lose money. I got funded by a big corporation last year. They didn't like what I said in the meeting. They didn't return their funding, and that's cool because there's always somebody else who will step up. What I like to do, and it's something that you said, I like to see where my interests align with people with money and not demonize them, with the understanding that this is a corporation, right? And the corporations are going to do things they consider in their interests. And sometimes their interests can align with the needs of the people. Sometimes they don't. But if we're going to really have the kind of change we need in our community, we have to be clear about what our objectives are.
Strong voices like yours, I mean, it's much easier to do that. But I guess what my argument is that a lot of the voices aren't as strong as they need to be. They're kind of whispering around town, if you will.
A lot of people don't care. Let's be real honest. A lot of people just want to get paid. Sometimes you build your voice and build it strong because you understand that the stronger your voice is, the more permission you have to say what needs to be said. You don't have to ask permission. When you're Maureen Taylor, you can say whatever the hell you want to say, and the same people are going to take care of you as they took care of you before, because they know and expect that from her. Exactly. So it's how did I get where I'm going to be? So I do want to talk about, the city has announced several initiatives to address the needs of average Detroit residents. They've talked about housing preservation and preserving up to 10,000 units that are housing tax credits and are going to lose their low-income status in the near future. They have set aside 20% of all new housing for inclusionary housing, and they have the ordinance, and they're doing planning in 10 neighborhoods to try to bring those neighborhoods back, and they have meetings with the community, And they have been really trying to get some new projects underway. I think I saw something where Sonia Mays is doing a project, Develop Detroit is doing a project.
Yes, down it's in kind of, I would say, I would call it actually Midtown. Is just west of the Veterans Hospital.
But they have a cool new name for that area. So I'm trying to remember the cool new name for that area. But anyway, she's setting aside, a certain number of houses for people at or below 50% of the AMI. And so if you talk to the city will show that they're trying to do a better job now than they have done. The city did announce pay-as-you-stays. The city is working, putting some CARES dollars out there. So my question to you is, when you see the city working on improving what they're doing, why isn't that enough?
Because they simply aren't committing the resources necessary to do what needs to be done. The project that you talked about, I think, was about a $40 million development. And if you're only talking about, I think it was like 60 or 70 units of housing, that really isn't a lot of units of housing for the dollar value of figure that's being spent. I would maintain that part of the problem is that the focus is wrong, it's incorrect, because they have millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that they actually could spend. But if they begin to recycle some of the money that they have, I think they could put that money to a much better use. The part of the problem is that the projects that they always talk about are big, sort of high visibility projects, when the average Detroiter probably only needs $25,000 to $30,000, $40,000 to fix up their house. And I think a better use of the money is to spend it to help people preserve them where they are, or allow them to move where they may want to move. You also have restrictive rules and programs that are funded, such as the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, which is supposed to be the largest provider of affordable housing here in the state of Michigan. And they have very restrictive rules on where they actually will provide money for lending, for mortgages, for home rehab. And those are the types of programs and changes that we need to put in place. We need to hold these institutions accountable for what they're supposed to do. It's great that you set aside 20% of the housing for people at 50% AMI, but we need to be doing more than that. We need 40% housing. We need the housing where people live. A lot of people were moved out of downtown because they allowed a lot of those subsidies to expire on a lot of the housing, especially on Washington Boulevard, where people were summarily moved out. And then you had the recent situation behind the fights where, lo and behold, the guy buys a building and he didn't even know was filled with low-income people. So those people are being transitioned out. I think they could do a lot more with preservation of affordable housing. We'll see what happens with a lot of that. I could understand why they didn't create an affordable housing trust that would have taken control of those 10,000 units to have ensured that the low-income housing restrictions could stay in place. That's a simple transfer of property.
Let me ask a question though, because it seems like there's two different theories of government, right? Mm-hmm. One theory of government is it's the mayor's job to stimulate a good economy and to promote economic growth, jobs, and increase the wealth of the area. And another person's view may be it is the mayor's job to strengthen neighborhoods and help the least of us and help strengthen the population of Detroit so that you can build from there. And that if you have a stronger base, everything gets better and it's more equitable.
Right.
Do you agree that those are two polarities, that there's just a different theory of government?
No, I think that they're not mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is I think part of it is how we allocate our dollars and how we allocate our tax benefits. And I think what we've seen over the last years is that there's been a huge amount of subsidy directed at creating development in downtown, where there's been less subsidy provided for creating development in our neighborhoods. And what I'm suggesting is that we probably need to put the brakes on the subsidy downtown, because they've created their own economy. They created an economy that was based on subsidies that were provided by the citizens of the city of Detroit. And so if we're going to redirect our efforts, we need less subsidy in downtown, because if they created this great market for themselves, then it should be a market-driven approach to what occurs and allow us to use more subsidy to take care of people in the neighborhoods. You have two jobs you have to perform. Yes, you have to have a strong central business district. Yes, you have to have employment opportunity. But if you don't have strong neighborhoods and people in your community who feel as though they are part of this whole scenario, then you still end up with the same problem, which is people that become disaffected with government, disaffected with what they see because they feel that it no longer represents their interests. And I think that is the balance that you have to have, and you have to be strong about what your position is on that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I happen to agree with you. I think that there are those people, though, who really do believe that it is the job of government to bring in rich people, to bring in white people, to bring in corporations. And so, or
That's
to
how
bring
it-
in, you know,
that's-
even if you look at our business development model, we're so interested in creating these cool new businesses as opposed to stabilizing the long-term businesses that are in our community and helping them grow. And the odd thing about it is these cool new businesses come and then they go. They come and then they go. We aren't necessarily working on a plan to help, you know, strengthen what is. We have this mindset that we've got to make Detroit new and different.
And I call it, as I said earlier, it's just a home run theory. You know, we have about 34,000 independent businesses here in the city of Detroit, roughly. And that number has probably dropped dramatically because of COVID. But I maintain that if in fact we encourage those 34,000 businesses to create 4 jobs themselves, you create over 120,000 jobs with the same probably level of subsidies you provide to Chrysler to create 3,500 jobs. And coincidentally, we haven't seen the numbers of Detroiters who are actually being hired by that. And so when I'm saying we got to turn the whole apple cart over, I mean just that. If the focus is on preserving existing businesses that have survived through the hard times, that's where we need to put our money. If we're talking, new businesses are great, but we got a lot of old businesses that were here. I represented a property owner, Glenn Walsh, I'll use his name. He built the first subdivision, not quite a subdivision, the first commercial development on Livernois. Well, when they built the State Fair, they provided subsidy for the development over there. Half of his business moved to a subsidized area. Now, this is the guy that created a business for himself without any subsidy from anybody, and yet he lost business because of a subsidized development in the city of Detroit. We have to take a good look at that to make sure that those types of things are not occurring, but at the same time, figure out how we empower our local businesses. We're not spending the money that we need to spend with our local businesses. If you look at the numbers of what the city contracts for in Black businesses, and I use that term, I'm talking about Detroit-based businesses, because we've had a lot of businesses that have gotten a Detroit address and become Detroit-based and had nothing to do with
Detroit in the name. Everybody is putting Detroit in it.
Real Detroit businesses, people who we can ride by their house and see them and say, hey man, my brother needs a job, my cousin needs a job. That's the focus that we really need to be directed.
I mean, we have so many people.
I want to ask you about something that you said around market-driven approaches and letting the market sort of decide the kinds of subsidy and where we need to go in terms of development and revitalization. Suffice it to say, there are neighborhoods in the city of Detroit that have suffered for decades dilapidation of housing, depopulation, business divestment, and we have 139 square miles in the city. The city is massive. And we have huge swaths of open land that may not that may not move market if it's developed or not. Do you have thoughts on open space management and open space agriculture and development in the city of Detroit? If so, what are your thoughts around maintaining our open and vacant spaces?
Part of the huge land management issue that we have is that we actually pay for that. And the most classic example is in stormwater runoff. We pay for stormwater runoff for 139 square miles of this city, while there might be 30 to 40 miles of vacant land in the city of Detroit. And so when we talk about managing our infrastructure, what we have to begin to do is change how we do what we do. In some cities that I've studied, you have situations where you create stormwater runoff in areas where you have vacant land so that you don't have to necessarily treat and manage all of that land. And so you've got to take a different perspective in how we do our streets, how we do our curb cuts, because it changes the amount of water that's actually delivered and flows into the system. We also have to look at how we use that particular land and how we can put that land to productive use. You still have to maintain 139 square miles, but the question is, how can we put this land to a productive use or position land so that if in fact we need developable space and land in an area, we have that. Now, you know, Mayor Bing raised a very controversial idea about moving people out of areas, and he was met with tremendous resistance, but it's kind of ironic that I can ride down a street on the east side and I might see one house on an entire block. And so there's some question about whether or not we need to maintain those types of areas to put people in a much better position rather to be alone on a block by themselves. I obviously am not advocating that people be forced out of their particular home because that's not what I'm about. But what I am saying is that we have to begin to have a really honest conversation with people in their neighborhoods, because they always say that every neighborhood has a future. And yet when you look at how we spend our money, it's very clear that every neighborhood does not have a future.
You know, we have in our at ECN, we have we look at urban homestead as a typology that we actually think is a useful typology. Not everybody wants to live in a concentrated block. Right. So I think that if you could look not at vacancy as a deficit, but also look at the opportunity to do productive things on that vacant land with people living there. Because if you want to farm, every farmer needs a person living there. I think that we also have to open our minds up to, because I think what I really liked hearing you say is that the city should have lean government and should not be deciding every damn thing, right? And I think that giving people control over some of those decisions makes sense, as opposed to trying to figure out how to manage every square mile. The other thing is that ECN engaged in a study, which is going to be released in October or November, where we came up with this concept of creating places where corporations could invest in green stormwater infrastructure to offset their requirement to create green stormwater infrastructure. And we have an area that we call Goodstock. We looked at some specific parcels of land and we said, what if they did this here? So instead of the city having to use its dollars, the city could get corporations to use their dollars and use that to offset a burden. And we know a lot of corporations already are not even complying with the stormwater requirements. Right. But in order to make that happen, you would need several pieces of legislation passed to create that incentive. Is that something that you think makes sense?
Oh, it makes a tremendous amount of sense, because when you're talking about corporations sort of fulfilling their civic responsibility, if there's a mechanism for them to offload some responsibility and create something beneficial for the community, then I think those things can be done. I don't necessarily think that we probably would need any special legislation, quite frankly. I think there are enough laws on the books and organizations that can be used to funnel those
policies, though. I'm talking about policies. I think the city has to change policy in order for that to work, and we've outlined it in our report.
I'm anxious to read that report because, you know, having run the water department at one time and really understanding the issue of stormwater maintenance and management, that is something that they clearly need to do. We can't keep taking all the water in, because the largest portion of most people's water bill now has nothing to do with the water. It's the drainage fee, and it's killing people, it's killing organizations, especially nonprofits that have parking lots that have to pay those huge fees. I did notice when I was riding my bike, because I'm really getting into this bike riding thing, I was riding up around Ferry and Shane, and those areas up there where you still have large parcels of land where you might find one house or two houses. And I was interested to see that actually was some homesteading going on. Because a lot of those old wood frame houses had been redeveloped and were being put to productive use and actually had their own crop areas out there. And I think again, it's a question of how we change our mindset and how we think about what it is we want to do. I'm open to whatever people want to do because I think that the best solutions come from the people who live in the community.
That's right. And when you empower community organizations to empower people inside the community, then you have a situation where the community can partner with government. When we look at public-private partnerships, a lot of times the private means a rich corporation. I think we need the private to be community organizations also. And I do want to give some credit to some people in the city who are seeing this and trying to make it work, because I don't think it's all or nothing. I think that there are increasing understandings that you need to do this. But let's turn to the question of the hour.
Yeah.
Are you running for mayor?
That is I'm gonna say I am strongly considering a run. I've been spending sort of the last 2 or 3 months going around the community, just talking to a lot of different people and really trying to understand what their issues are.
I think that's what we're going to name this episode, Strongly Considering a Run.
I mean, it's something that I'm considering. I'm sort of in the final stages of making up my mind, but I would say if I was a betting man, I would be betting that my name would be on the ballot. I think there needs to be a real policy discussion in the city of Detroit. And I don't think we've really had a strong policy discussion in Detroit the last 2 elections. And I think what I offer, because I do have a broad base of experience in having managed and having run and having been elected, to provide some context and insight in how I think things could be done differently. You know, when you've been in the system and you've seen how it operates and you've seen how it can break down, you have real strong attitudes and opinions about what needs to be done. And so I am strongly considering that run. I think
like 99.9%. That's a good, I consider this breaking news. But hey, listen, I want to say that one of my dreams is that we live in a city where people can engage in healthy dialogue and healthy disagreement so the best ideas can rise to the top. One of the criticisms I have with thin-skinned politicians is that you can't ever disagree with them. And I actually think disagreement is productive when it's done with a genuine heart and when people are really trying to get at the right thing. How do you feel about the, what kind of culture would you want to have inside of the community that would help ensure that you don't live in this
glass house?
Glass house, yeah.
I think you put yourself in a glass house when you kind of isolate yourself from the people in the community. And I think it's your responsibility to be out as much as possible and to talk to people and have many different points of information. One thing I really appreciated, you know, when I worked for Kwame Young was that he knew everybody. He got a lot of information, and oftentimes when he would call you in and ask you a question, it's because he probably heard something from somebody on the street who he knew, and he was making sure that you were going to provide him with the right information.
And so what was your role with Kwame Young?
I was a young executive assistant to Kwame Young. I was 28 years old, and I was part of what they call this whiz kid movement. They come in, where he was bringing in young people to kind of really understand what the role of government was. And I tell people that my first community experience with Kwame Young, when you talk about prison population, back in the mid 80s, there was a big debate in the state of Michigan, given the fact that the city of Detroit did not actually have any houses, any prisons within the city limits. And so one of my first projects actually was the siting of the prison on the Mount Ryan site. And my first community meeting was to go out into the Conant Gardens area and to actually convince the community that placing a prison in their neighborhood was a good thing to do. And of course, I can tell you how that community meeting went. It was very vocal and very uplifting, I will say. And so when you start your career off in really engaging people in the community, and then the door-to-door, knocking on doors, he actually believed in you had to knock on doors. I can't tell you there was not a place in the city of Detroit that I did not go to where I was either delivering a letter from the mayor at a family reunion, at a birthday party, at a union hall. So you develop just this tremendous affinity for engaging people. And I think as a byproduct of that, I am not a very thin-skinned person because having been in a lot of positions where you get criticized, criticism comes with the territory. And oftentimes it's not even criticism. People have a different way of how they view things. And I think in my maturity, I understand that much better than I did when I was 28. And so understanding that people have a right to question what is done, people have a strong need to have transparency and how decisions are made. People have to be advised and people have to be consulted. This is not a dictatorship. This is a democracy. And the culture that I would create would be one that would be open and inviting, because I'm going to bring people like Orlando P. Bailey into my administration. And if Donna Gibbons Davidson wants a position, she certainly has one.
So speaking of administrations, your next gig, you were a private attorney, and then you became the deputy mayor to Kwame Kilpatrick, whose leadership was certainly a little bit more controversial than Coleman Young's, at least from the perspective of the community in many parts. What good things did you do there, and what things would you not do in the future if you became mayor?
Well, I think part of his difficulty is that he was young and he didn't, I think, really understand the depth and the level of responsibility that he owed to the community. Excuse me. I think part of what made him dynamic was that he did have energy, he did have vision. He wasn't afraid to confront issues. But I think, and I came in his second term, I wasn't there in the first term because most of the major problems that he had occurred really in his first term. I was sort of recruited by two business folks in Detroit, Don Barton and Bella Marshall, who actually recruited me to go work with the administration because at that time I was serving as general counsel for the Detroit Public Schools. I'm actually one of the few people who have been general counsel for the Detroit Public Schools and also president of the Detroit Board of Education. So I kind of have both those topics. And so part of my responsibility was really in managing the city's budget. And when I came in 2005, the city was facing tremendous financial issues. And it was part of my responsibility was to develop really budget strategies aimed at avoiding bankruptcy. And I remember coming in 2005 when the city got downgraded on its credit rating because of all of the major issues and things that occurred. And as part of our budget stabilization package, we were able to sell more than $100 million worth of real estate for the city to plug the budget hole. The bad thing about it was we obviously had to lay off, I think, about 5,000 people. We reduced the workforce by, I think, 25%, which was, I think, a major issue because we couldn't really get the concessions necessary from the unions in order to balance the budget. So I was focused primarily on the budget and making sure that the city stayed afloat and making sure that the people got what they needed as best we could in very trying circumstances. But there was a lot of positive things that occurred. I don't think it was all bad. I think in hindsight, people only look at the bad parts. But when you look at the foundations of things that occurred, for example, the Riverfront Park system, the Riverfront Conservancy, things were created that allowed the city to shed a great deal of expense. The creation of Eastern Market Corporation, the creation of the General Services Department, which consolidated performance of essential city functions within one department. There were a lot of great things that occurred. And I think my crowning achievement really was in defeating and beating back suburban control of the Detroit water and sewage system. Because I understand that there was a tremendous pressure when Kwame had his issues to sell off that system.
Well, listen, we do want to hear more. We do have to go. I really appreciate you taking this time. I really hope that when you're ready to break that news, you contact Bridge Detroit Magazine and bring it from the hood first. You don't have to go to one of the big dailies. Take it to Bridge Detroit. You already know Orlando P. Bailey. And let him help break that news. That's just a request, you know?
That's a request that you didn't have to make, because my campaign, when I choose to announce, is all about the community and having a city of Detroit that works for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So you heard it here first. He's 99.9% sure, and when he breaks, he can break it with Orlando P. Bailey, and we can't wait to read all about more. So I want to thank you for coming on here. We have some shout outs, Orlando.
Yes. So shout out to the magnificent folks who put on the Detroit Jazz Festival. I also want to shout out a daughter of Detroit, a daughter of Black Bottom, Marsha Philpott, aka Marsha Music, artist, commentator, and historian of our great city. She retired from the courts, and she's finally like rested and doing her thing. So we are excited about what retirement will bring. We only know that means that we get to suck up more history and more just dopeness that Marsha exudes. Also, Cranes released their 40 under 40 list. We want to shout out our friends Chase Cantrell, Candace Fortman, and Charity, who is in the city, works for the Duggan administration actually, in being named one of Crane's 40 under 40. And today is historical as well. It's September 8th, and today was the first day of school for a lot of Detroit students. So shout out to all of the teachers and parents who are making it happen here in the city of Detroit, whether their children are virtual and they're serving as teachers and principal, or whether their students are going for face-to-face instruction. Tanya, do you have any shout outs?
Yes, I want to shout out Judge U.S. Federal Judge Lori Michelson for her decision to place a moratorium on police abuse of protesters who are not breaking the law. I want to shout out Detroit Will Breathe for continuing to fight the good fight. I think they celebrated 100 days of protest last week. And I do also want to acknowledge all of the other people who are protesting with them, whose names don't always get mentioned. I really appreciate you bringing their names up, Anthony, because I think that this is really a coalition movement for justice.
Yeah.
And I would like to shout out my nephew, Reynaldo Jimenado de Guzman, who has been on those streets also, and who is in the middle of making a documentary of the police abuse in Rochester, New York.
Right. Well, I'm going to do a personal shout out first to my son, Eric, who went to school with, I think, Donna, is that your youngest daughter?
No, my oldest daughter, Camille.
He's getting married in December, so I'm going to shout out to him.
Congratulations.
I also want to shout out to a fatherhood forum group that I've been working with, Willie Bell. It's called Farm Fathers, Army Renaissance Men, which is a very dedicated group creating positive role models and images for fathers to be involved in. And then I want to give a shout out to my church, Triumph, under the leadership of Pastor Solomon Kenlock. This past weekend, I think we gave out food for about 2,000 people, had a partnership with DTE on energy affordability and things of that nature. So I'm going to give my church a shout out, and the many members whose generosity allowed us during COVID to feed hundreds of thousands of people, and also provide laptops to our young people in the city of Detroit.
Okay.
All right, that does it for this episode of Authentically Detroit. Shout out to Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, thank you for listening, and catch the wave.